Hello, today we're talking about dehumanizing language and how it harms us and other people. We're going to dive into this clip from Brené Brown on the Marie Forleo podcast. It's about 2 minutes long. We're going to dive into it and then we're going to chat.
The process of dehumanization is the process that we use to slowly, primarily using words and images, nothing more. Dehumanization is the process of slowly moving people out of, I want to use this table as an example, or this coffee. So here's a group of people that we want to harm. It's a group of people that we hate, a group of people that a leader has told us, here, this tea right here is the cause of all your pain and suffering. So we hate these people and we want to hurt them and we want to see them diminished. But they're within this moral protective zone that we have as humans. So slowly over time, we start using words and images of them that dehumanize them, that move them slowly and slowly and slowly into what we call moral exclusion. They no longer are protected by what we believe is human basic rights. And we see the process of dehumanization at the core of every genocide recorded in history. The Nazis used, I think the word is Untermenschen. It's subhuman to describe Jews. Every conflict you can see. And so what's happening in our country right now, from the leadership to the resistance,
Yep.
no one has high ground here. We are slowly allowing ourselves to start using dehumanizing language to describe people with whom we disagree.
Yes.
Which then makes it okay to physically hurt them. And when we use dehumanizing language, it says much more about us than the people that we're railing against. And I think, honestly, it chips away at our soul.
Addison, what are your thoughts?
There is something that innately happens with terms that we use to refer to the groups, and it's called pejoration, where if that group is in the margins already, then sometimes the basic words we're already using, the proper words to describe them, become more negative in how we perceive them. And it's unfortunate because often these terms are the correct labels, and even that can start to feel dehumanizing. So that's just I want to say that this is something that it requires complex strategies to push back against. It doesn't even have to happen intentionally. Dehumanizing language happens automatically based on perception.
Mm-hmm. Ross, what are your thoughts? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I see this happening so much. It's whenever we say they did this, they did that. And I think a lot of the antidote is to talk in person and hear their why.
Go a little bit deeper into that why part.
Yeah, say whatever makes them a they, whether it's their philosophy on life or country of origin or status in this country or whatever. Just hear where they came from. What is your story that brought you to here? If it's an ideological difference, then from you, just be like, okay, what were the steps that brought you? What were the stories that you were told or saw that brought your mind to this place, so that you can identify with them, you can empathize with them on a human level.
Yeah. Addison, what are your reaction to that?
Well, I think that's nice because often it's harder to be unkind to an individual. And once you assign that person individuality, your respect for them increases. And often people will be like, well, you're now the exception. But if they met every person in the group, then they would all become exceptions. For the average person. And sometimes just hearing the story of one person from the group can improve our perception of the entire group. So
yeah, that's a good point. Being kind of an anomaly, is that what you mean?
Well,
to their expectation, anomaly to their expectation.
Let's just create a hypothetical situation in which people here's a great example. People were saying awful things last year about Haitian immigrants in Ohio. And part of the challenge is that Haitian immigrants in America don't have, and this is often the case for folks, they don't have maybe like a spokesperson who's a celebrity who's from Haiti. or they don't have a ton of visibility, right? They're working in their communities. They're tending to their daily lives. They don't have that visibility to say like, oh, hi, I'm here. I'm someone you like and trust. If you ran into me in regular life, you would think only positive things about me. So the challenge is it's hard to get your story out sometimes if you're in a marginalized group. But I bet if more people saw a Haitian person in front of them, or that story on television or in social media, they'd say, oh, that guy seems really nice, or he's just like a person I actually know, or oh my gosh, I didn't realize that people, I know Haitians. I'm so foolish, and I'm not going to say bad things about that group anymore.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point, is when you live with people, if you have no experience with them, then I don't know if it's a gullibility thing or just something else. There probably are multiple factors, but you know, if the leaders of your tribe are telling you something about a group that you have no experience with, I mean, did you see that? I mean, you were in Afghanistan, so did you see that in terms of how America talked about people there?
Well, sometimes it can end up splitting. Those who really intend to hate somebody can double down in the face of seeing that person directly. So some people can become more hateful. I think the key is peeling off those people who actually just are misinformed or ignorant. And I mean ignorant in the way of like, listen, they are still doing a mean thing, but it's for lack of knowing alternatives. And even me personally, found that while I already respected and intended to protect Afghans in Afghanistan, I ended up understanding and liking the culture and the individuals even more than I intended, right? I came to respect and understand and bring back some cultural traits with me. And so I felt like I grew, and I also saw others who had negative feelings about Afghans come to appreciate them, and a handful of people who dug their heels in and said and felt worse things about Afghans. And I think the key was just that most of us felt more positively over time with exposure.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I actually, when on my flight back from LA, when you moved there to Atlanta, I sat with someone who worked in the Afghan Air Force, and he had fled the country after we left and it fell. And he was like, he was a truck driver here in America. He's one of the refugees. And it was just interesting, like, to have that conversation. And just kind of, he's showing me pictures of like when he was flying, he flew helicopters. And I'd never met anyone from Afghanistan, so I had nothing except now I have this one interesting moment.
Well, you bring me to two things that really matter here. And one is sort of the mere exposure principle. Even if we're exposed over and over to something that we don't like, after a certain amount of exposure, we tend to like it more. So it's the sort of thing of, I may not like country music, but the more of it I listen to, there's a threshold at which I become familiar and I will like it more. Don't let me get too psyopy on you. That's the mere exposure principle. But it helps to just, I think working in entertainment, that even helps we do talk about like presenting stories of people we've never seen or heard from before. It will change. The other one is immediacy bias, meaning that the thing that seems most important is the thing that is in our senses, our eyes and our ears. And so if someone is speaking to us, they become suddenly more important. Even if we're opposed to them, opposing them even feels more important. And at least we can hash it out and deal with it. But if we're allowed to keep other people's humanity at bay, then it sort of prevents folks from having to deal with the reality that these are humans with wants and needs and real stuff. You know what? I'm going to tack on a third thing. The last thing, though, is that we all have a sort of a well of compassion, how much we can have. And I think sometimes in order to give immediacy and humanity to people, we'll show only their suffering. And that exhausts our audience. They feel compassion for those people who are suffering, but we can only suffer with them so much. So I think it's equally as important to show people of different cultures and backgrounds and races and religions enjoying themselves, celebrating life, doing daily activities and feeling good, because it bonds our humanity without exhausting our empathy.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. Ross, what are your reaction to all these things? These three things.
Such good thoughts, Addison. It's forming my thoughts. So I want to maybe throw out there, I think there's maybe a distinction. There's some people who just want something to be angry at, whatever reason they've gotten there. Those people may be a lost cause as far as trying to help change their perspective. Everybody else, which I think is the majority, for them, this is what comes to mind. In school, I took a class where they exposed us to this TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I looked it up here. It's The Danger of the Single Story. And what she says is basically, she's an African, and she's like, what do you guys think of when you hear Africa? And they're like, dark-skinned people in loincloths in little like clay huts. And she's like, that's the only story you've heard. But the danger of the single story is that, where you assume everybody is that, if that's the only one you've heard. And so I think maybe Addison and me, and you too, Jason, like us as media producers, we have an opportunity to expose our audience to multiple stories of no matter what demographic a people group fits into, so that we can expand the empathy for people who are otherwise they'd or othered. If we start to expand and show them the things they do on a Saturday afternoon for fun, and the joy they're having when they're barbecuing with their family, as well as when their child dies at a young age, or a tornado rips through their house or whatever, like seeing, I don't know, story writers, movie makers probably understand this so well. They're like, okay, save the cat. We got to show the character is good, does a selfless act at the beginning so that we love them. And then there's all these other ways that you flesh out their humanity. And I think whether it's in conversation, we have the power to tell people about experiences we've had with certain people, or if we're creating media, start to represent a more multifaceted version than the stereotype of a people group that you're representing.
Yeah. Addison, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the show I just worked on it started with that in mind. So, wonderful, talented, Oscar-nominated actor Sterling K. Brown came on from the beginning of this project. He's Black and is an executive producer, and the writing team brought on Black writers to help tell stories that would best fit the character that Sterling's going to play. And we had, diversity through the cast and crew. And I think that comes out in telling a more robust story that features some elements of that diversity, of characters who are underestimated for being a woman, or who, they're just letting there be interactions between a white and a Black character about whether a character is racist, or not, or doesn't know it. Those things are just moments, and it's embedded within a bigger story that's not just about their individual identities, but it's informed by it. So having participated in it, I see it's possible. It can be done and reach broad audiences, right? This is kind of a show that's going to reach, white guys in their 40s, right? And I think that is going to be helpful. So I know it can be done. I think we can still do even better, all of us.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind from what you all say is, one of the things that by being politically active this last year in a way that was antagonistic to many people in my family, friends, and community, it created a reaction. And I actually got to see an underbelly of my groups, of which I was more of a blind spot, because I hadn't been in opposition to them, so there was no reason for me to experience those things. But as soon as I did, then I saw I was literally the object of that. And I think some people that have those different stories, that gives us a way to kind of get that, what I got by doing that. It's sort of a bridge for people that maybe haven't done that yet, or don't intend to, but yet they can still get that other story. And if they're open to receiving it, they can do that. Ross, you have a thought on that?
I have a story of my own foible of this gone wrong. So I was in a seminary class. It was a very liberal seminary. I don't consider myself this liberal. I'm somewhere in the middle. But people are heightened awareness of this. And I was in a creative writing class. There was this famous writer who was co-teaching it with the seminary professor. And I was so excited because at the time, writing was my big thing. And so I thought, let's write a story of people we generally stereotype, and then put them in the same situation where they realize they have the same underlying motivation. Now, this is not my most shining moment. I know I would have done this differently now, but I wrote a story with like Mexicans in a car driving by commenting, and a couple of black kids who are in a gang that to prove their devotion, they have to go steal mail from a famous person's mailbox. I don't know. I just made this up. I thought it'd be an interesting thing. So these kids, one of them drops, the two black kids, one of them drops the other black kid off, and the guy steals the mail. Or actually, they walked there or took an Uber or something like that. But the guy orders an Uber, the black kid who stole the mail of Richard Simmons, actually. I was trying, that's a stereotype. Stereotyped fella, and we assume certain things about him. And so I wanted to put all these people in this situation where they look so differently, but they have an underlying motive or whatever. So the kid who steals the mail calls an Uber, jumps in the Uber, and is driving away. Turns out the Uber driver is Richard Simmons' normal everyday driver. Like he, drives in places and stuff like that. And he starts to ask the kid, what are you doing, son? And the kid like kind of realizes it's an older black dude who's driving the car, and he kind of spills the beans, feeling like he has someone he can confide in. And the guy then reveals like, well, I'm Richard Simmons' regular driver. You just, you stole his mail, young man. And I think the reason you're trying to do it after hearing your story is because ultimately at your core, you're trying to provide something for your family, like your mother. You want to make sure your mom is well provided for or something, to protect her. And all this was his way of doing it. And he's like, you know what? Richard Simmons does what he does also to make sure his mother feels provided for and safe or whatever. And okay, so my attempt was taking these stereotyped individuals and show that there's this deep, deep, deep down motivation that motivated them together. But everyone after I finished reading it in front of the class, there were 3 people who said like, I am offended by your story. And this has major problems with me. And I'm like, I am so sorry. I'm open to hear. Please tell me what I did wrong. And I think when it came down to it, it was like, I don't have the right to write any of these people's stories. And I added to the stereotype for young black men stealing something in gangs. Like I could have taken a young black man and put him in a much different situation, because even though some people may do that, black kids stealing something, it doesn't help to add to the body of stories related to that demographic to put them in that light.
Addison, what are your thoughts?
I mean, this is something that, thanks for being honest and sharing, because that is rough, and it can be hard to recap. And I am pretty liberal, so it's funny that I was feeling the anxiety of being like, oh, that would be very tense to tell this story in a group, right? I was feeling that tension. And part of the challenge is that a lot of us want to do better, but things like pandering, where we take a stereotype and try to participate in it, that doesn't help. And often, we can't undermine a stereotype by starting from it and therefore reinforcing it at the beginning, because then we just say that, then our story just becomes an exception instead of something that shows that everyone's an exception to that stereotype. I agree that, if somebody, a movie for which Sterling K. Brown was nominated for that Oscar was American Fiction, in which there's a writer who, he is black and he is a writer, but in an effort to be more inclusive, they're still wanting him to tell more stereotypical stories. And then he does sort of sarcastically, and people end up loving it. And so I think the challenge is we almost need those magical stories like American Fiction to sort of be a meta story, to help us call it out, to thread the needle and walk that really narrow tightrope. And at the same time, I'm a writer, and I say I'm putting together a writer's room. I would make sure that it's inclusive if we're going to tell other folks' stories. And otherwise, it can sound hard to do at a time like this, but it's still going to be important for me to just tell my story and maybe hope that others relate. Maybe it's not the most important angle, right? We're dealing with social issues that affect people of color and LGBTQ people differently, but I can still do my best to tell the stories I tell. I don't have to shift to trying to be the mouthpiece of everybody always. There are people who are marginalized who they're going to tell their stories better than me. And it can sound anxious or anxiety inducing, but just leaving that to them.
Mm-hmm.
think it's totally fine.
Ross, give us your thoughts and then close us out on this topic of dehumanizations. Your final words.
Sure. Thank you. I think a lot of this comes down to a moral issue, and it's sometimes a challenge to motivate them, like be more moral or whatever. Even though I think it's a worthy cause to try, and the power of art can do that for sure. But I am also happy. I sit in a lot of corporate conferences and boardrooms and things doing visual note taking. That's my job, and I love that it is being like diversity is being prized as a financial benefit, like, because if you have more diverse backgrounds in a room, you're going to come up with a more creative solution. And innovation is the name of the game for so many industries right now, that they're like, yes, give us the really colorful, diverse group of minds in one place. So I love the fact that we can tackle it as artists from the moral perspective. Let's make the hero someone who is doing good despite stereotypes, or was busting the stereotypes or whatever. I also am glad that the economic motives are out there, and the philosophy in Money Making America is coming around to, like, yes, we need more diverse voices to make our company better.
Yeah. Ross, any final thoughts outside of that?
I think that's it. I probably spoke more than
Addison, what are your final thoughts?
Sometimes the best way to beat dehumanization is I think we all got to be a little less terminally online. Because part of the challenge is that being online makes us feel differently, right? We're three white guys and we're talking about diversity, but this is our social group and this is who we have to talk about with today. And we do make an effort to talk with other people. But even the corporate side, like you said, hey, we're not going to change the world overnight. And in the sort of terminally online view, it might be like, you know what? Corporate diversity is all BS. Heard it before, right? That folks think that it's just false or just advertising. But we've got to make room. We've got to make room for little bits of progress, like workplace corporate efforts. And yes, it is to the ends of them making money. But if our morals can align with someone else's selfish self-interest, then I do think we have to take those small victories and keep pushing things slowly towards progress. And I would say, like if sometimes if we feel combative towards those who are making an effort towards learning more and being more inclusive, if we still feel combative towards those folks, I think it's time to log off and go talk to people in real life and be face to face and realize, like, we just wish we could do more. We're not angry at those people, and I think that's how we continue to chip away at these issues.
Yeah. Well, Addison, tell us who you are and how people can explore your work.
All right, I'm Addison, and Addison Blu, I'm the military technical advisor on Paradise on Hulu, and you can watch that show now. It's streaming everywhere. Well, no, it's streaming on Hulu, and but it's on your TV or computer or cell phone now.
All right, Ross, introduce yourself and what do you got going?
Okay, my name is Ross Boone. Right now, my favorite project to have people visit is Creature Habits app on both app stores. It's a devotional, super interactive devotional based on beautiful imagery and stuff on the app stores. Creature Habits.
All right. Thank you, Ross. This has been a spontaneous conversation on the Share Life podcast, and thank you for joining us.